then we've reached our final session, which will be chaired by CRC Honors Program student Jordan Hansen.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jordan Hansen. I'm a current student, like most of my other session chairs today, for the Cosumnes River College Honors Program. After the introduction, the section will consist of our main speaker's 40-minute presentation. After the presentation, we'll hear from our formal respondents briefly, and our speaker will then have a chance to reply to their comments and questions. Finally, you, the audience, will be able to ask questions. Please note that this event is being filmed for broadcast by the Sacramento Educational Cable Consortium. Our speaker for the session is Angel Eduardo. Angel Eduardo is a senior writer and editor at FIRE. This stands for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Through his writing and work at FIRE, he aims to promote a culture of free speech, inquiry, and freedom of expression. He emphasizes the importance of honest, good faith, and compassionate engagement with people across the political spectrum. He is best known for coining the rhetorical strategy star manning, which we will learn more about today. His presentation to us this afternoon is titled How to Starman, Arguing from Compassion. Please join me in welcoming Angel Eduardo.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. How we feeling? You have one more in you? We good? All right, cool. So obviously we've been talking about civil discourse, engaging across a disagreement, all these wonderful things. I agree with most of what my colleagues have said here today. I will try my best to synthesize a lot of the things that they've said and hopefully give you some new stuff as well. Forgive me if we repeat a little bit. It's kind of necessary sometimes. But we'll start with a quick story. All right, so way back in the late 1900s, I was 5 years old, just about 5 years old, and I watched this episode of Sesame Street. And in this episode of Sesame Street, the giant woolly mammoth Snuffleupagus and the little monster Elmo are standing on either side of a blue mailbox. And they get into this argument. Snuffy keeps saying, "This mailbox is small." Elmo keeps saying, "That mailbox is big." And of course, as they go back and forth, you as the viewer, I as the viewer, could see the point, right? Even at 5 years old. It's pretty clear. Obviously, it's big to Elmo because he's small. Obviously, it's small to Snuffleupagus because he's big. They couldn't see it because they couldn't see from one another's perspectives. They were just arguing their own side, their own perspective, and not understanding why they couldn't get any further. So that's obviously the point you're supposed to get from this little sketch. I haven't seen it since I was 5. I found this little clip online, this little screenshot. That's the only thing I could see. If anybody has access to some crazy database, please email me. I would love to watch that thing again and see if I actually remember it the right way. But, so that's the point, right? And there are many different variations of this point that I'm sure you've heard. Here's another one. Is that a 6 or a 9? You have one person on either end claiming that it is one or the other. And the lesson is just because you're right doesn't mean I'm wrong, you just haven't seen things from my side, right? Same argument as the Sesame Street thing, except there's one crucial difference. The number that was painted on the floor actually is either a 6 or a 9. So somebody actually is wrong, right? And what it requires is taking a step back, trying to figure out what direction is it facing, are there numbers on either side, so that you can orient yourself, get some relevant context, and understand what the reality is, regardless of either person's perspective. Right? And that's an important thing to note here. I don't want you to come away thinking that I'm telling you there's no such thing as right or wrong. What I'm trying to say is there's a reason why we have different conceptions of right and wrong. And it can be as simple as the fact that we're standing on either side of a particular issue or object. Now, I'm going to illustrate this a little bit further. What direction is this dancer spinning in? Clockwise or counterclockwise? How many clockwise? Raise your hand. Many counterclockwise? Did it switch for anybody as they were staring? Can anybody make it switch right now? Full people? Okay, cool. Now, obviously, this is an optical illusion. There's a reason why we're divided on this. Because the dancer is in silhouette. And there's certain critical information that your brain needs in order to get properly oriented and know which direction the dancer is actually spinning. And when that information is removed, you actually can't tell, and you're not sure. And some people are certain that she's going one direction, other people are certain that she's going in another. And the reality is, it's neither and both, until you get more information. And now you can look either to the left or to the right and have the center image in your periphery, and look how it changes. And the reason why is because in either one on the ends, you're getting critical information that will dictate what direction your brain sees the dancer spinning in. That's how our discourse is. That's how our discourse works. There's critical information that we don't have about people who disagree with us, about people we disagree with, about people who see the world a different way. They're seeing lines you don't see. And we see lines they don't see. So how can we fix this? That's what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about how we can approach figuring this out in our day-to-day lives with the issues that matter to us and even issues that don't matter. So, all of this is grounded in a quote, a message of a quote that I really love. It's important to me as an artist, in particular. There isn't anyone you couldn't love once you know their story. I want you to think about this. Think about TV shows you've watched, movies you've watched, and villains that we enjoy watching and that we kind of resonate with, that we feel like, I kind of get where this person's coming from. We might say, yeah, they're wrong. Like, I'm not cool with this and this that they did, but I know where they're coming from, and I feel them, and I feel for them. Has anybody had this experience? You know they're the bad guy, but you kind of feel for them anyway. You feel that there's a tragedy there. Right? Even a show like Breaking Bad, which the main character is the bad guy, but you keep watching week to week, and you kind of root for him even though you know you're not supposed to. Why? Because you know his story. You know why he's doing what he's doing. You see his flaws. You see the scrap paper behind the math, why he got to what he got to at the other end of the equal sign there. That's what we're going to talk about today. So, all right, so there's a rhetorical concept called straw manning. You all know what this is, even if you've never heard that name before. Has anyone heard this name before? Have you heard this term before? Okay, yeah. Online, you'll hear it a lot. You'll see it a lot. So a straw man is a fallacy or a flaw in argumentation where you caricature what someone is saying. You make an exaggeration, you make a dumb, easier version of it to destroy. And people do this intentionally and unintentionally because that's what they hear, or because it's easier to defeat than the real argument. You make someone look silly, you make what they're saying seem ridiculous, you don't have to do a lot of work. Obviously, this is dishonest if you're doing it on purpose, because you're actively changing the argument to make it easier for yourself. It's also distorting, right? Because you're putting an argument out there that someone's actually not forwarding. So you're making things even more chaotic and difficult. Also dehumanizing, because the idea that's being put forth that is so absurd, that is easy for you to tear down, you're also claiming this person holds in their mind. This is what they believe. This is what they're arguing. Aren't they stupid? Aren't they insane? Aren't they evil? So what you're supposed to do is steelman, which is to engage with the strongest and most charitable version of a person's argument. Now, for example, if someone's arguing for universal basic income, a steelman would say, oh, automation is taking people's jobs away. You want to create a system whereby there's a baseline, nobody goes beneath it, and everyone gets enough money to at least subsist, right, in this changing landscape. That's a steelman. A straw man would be, oh, you want to collect free money. You just want handouts. You want to sit on the couch and get money for nothing. Two different arguments, right? Completely different conversation. So in practice, steelmanning is repeating back a person's argument to them in a way that they would agree with, right? You want them to say, yes, that's exactly what I mean. Actually, if you can improve upon their argument, so if you can articulate it better than they did, you're getting extra points there. Because first of all, you're assuring them that you're listening. You actually care what they have to say. You're not going to straw man. But also, you're ensuring for yourself that you're on the right track and that you're not wasting your time dealing with caricatures and distortions. Now, I'm sure you've noticed, steelmanning doesn't happen very often, right? And a lot of people, including ourselves, even when we can do it, we don't. Why is that? I believe it's because we aren't just strawmanning each other's arguments, we are strawmanning each other. We're missing the why behind the what. We're missing the story. Why does this person believe what they believe? What led them here? What are the life experiences and educations and all these things that combine to create the person I'm talking to right now? Believing what they believe, arguing what they argue, caring about what they care about. We're missing that because we're making the assumption that if they don't agree with me, if they don't have my principles and values and conclusions, they must be idiots or they must be insane or evil. How can we solve this? Obviously, I have the answer. And it comes from this quote from James Baldwin, kind of articulates a very important part of it. Once people know what they know, they make the unconscious assumption that they were born knowing what they know. And they forget that they had to learn everything they know. And that's fundamental to what I call star manning, which takes steel manning one step further. It's to engage not only with the strongest and most charitable version of your opponent's argument, but also with the strongest and most charitable version of your opponent, the person making the argument. It gets back to Dr. Bradley's personalization. Right? We want to see a human being. We want to know that a human being has a story. What is their story? That's what you need to understand before you can do anything else. If you want to oppose them effectively or persuade them, you have to know what they actually believe and also why. Because if you're not getting at those motivations, you're hopeless. You're not going to get anywhere with them. We first locate and explicitly acknowledge the fundamental human desires and values that are motivating their perspectives, undergirding their arguments, informing their perspective, their worldviews. And these are values that we all share as human beings, no matter how different we may be. Right? So kind of the premise of this entire day, all these talks, has been about finding ways to communicate across our differences, right? Talking to them over there, those people over there who think those things, who believe those things. My argument is a little bit different. My argument is that the over there, that gap is not as huge as we think it is. It's not as fundamental as we think it is. We tend to think that people who don't believe the way we do, think the way we do, vote the way we do, are almost like a different species of human. They're not. They're human just like us. And they're motivated by the same human desires that we have. Our job is to find them. So, compassion is the fundamental principle here. We've talked about curiosity a little bit. We've talked about civility a little bit. Those are important components as well. Compassion is the one that I hinge on. And now compassion is sometimes used interchangeably with empathy. I like to make a distinction. There's a great book by the Yale psychology professor Paul Bloom. It's called Against Empathy, the Case for Rational Compassion. He makes the same distinction. See, empathy is about feeling other people's feelings. If someone's crying, it kind of makes you start to cry. If someone's smiling, if they laugh, it kind of makes you smile and laugh. That's a human thing, and it's beautiful, but it can be hijacked very easily. We talked a little bit earlier about eyewitness testimony, right, in court. There's a reason why eyewitness testimony is a favored tool of lawyers. Because if you get the right witness on the stand, you've seen this in movies, if you get the right witness on the stand who gives a very compelling, tearful testimony, that can move a jury, even if that decision is wrong. Because we're human. That's hijacking that human impulse to feel other people's feelings. Compassion is a little bit different. In my view, compassion is about wishing others well, wanting what's best for other people, but not necessarily going so far as to feel their feelings in that moment. Right? You can feel for them, but you don't feel with them. And what that allows you to do is take a step back and say, I really care about this and I want this to be better, but that doesn't mean I'm going to do anything to fix it. So, you're all too young to be parents, most of you probably, but imagine a little kid crying because he wants the cookie, but it's going to spoil dinner. You can feel for the kid. I get it. You're having a horrible time. You really want that cookie. It would make you the happiest kid in the world, but I'm not going to give it to you because I know it's the wrong thing to do here. That's the difference. And so compassion also comes with the recognition, the realization that different people have different upbringings, educations, experiences, psychologies, parents, peers, and temperaments. All of those things combine to create who they are right now, what they believe, why they believe it. Passion allows us to see that everyone has a story. And that there, but for the grace of chance, go we. This is hard sometimes to understand or to accept. But if we were them, if we had their experiences, their upbringing, their environment, their parents, their educations, their friends, we would be them and we would believe the same thing they do. Only reason we don't is because we had a different set of those circumstances. That's the fundamental grounding. So star manning is founded on a very simple and I would argue very safe assumption. And I challenge you to think of it. Think about it. Most people, most of the time, are doing what they believe is right and good and just. Or at the very, very least, justifiable given their goals. And those goals are almost never framed as wanting to make the world a worse place to live. Think about the most horrible people you've ever heard of. I guarantee you that vast majority of them did not wake up every morning and think, how can I cause the most amount of pain and anguish and suffering to my fellow man today? How can I make the world worse today? That's not what was in their head. Even the worst people are thinking, I'm doing the best thing. Again, remember the 6 and 9 thing. I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying this is what they think. That's important to understand. Most people, you accept, 2% of population that are psychopaths, which we can just set aside for a minute. Most people are acting towards certain motivations. Now, there are a bunch of ways that people have categorized these things. I categorize it this way. There's 4. People want safety, they want security, want satisfaction. Well, I did that. And they want success. If you think about people's motivations for things, you can probably boil it down to at least one of these. You really drill down into the fundamental. What is it that they're after? Why does this matter? What do they care about? Where are they headed with this? It's because they think, at least they think, it will lead them to one of these. So, how do we star man? I want you all to leave with this very actionable advice. First step is confirmation. This is all done through discourse, through dialogue. So the first thing you want to do is find the way to steel man. Make sure you can repeat back to them what they think in a way that they would agree with. And try your best to do it in a way where they say, you know what, that's better than I put it. Because you know you're on the right track. And you'll be surprised how disarming this is. Because most people are not used to being heard anymore. So if you're the person who's actually hearing them, they're going to pause and they're going to listen to you when it's your turn. So think about that. Next, communicate. This is the longest part of the process, okay? You're going to ask questions to try to drill down. Okay, why do they believe this? What is it that is making them care about this so much? You know, people have talked about abortion. They've talked about all these very hot topics, right? There are reasons why these people care about this, and the reasons are not because they're stupid or because they're evil. No one is walking around going, yeah, I'm against abortion because I'm an idiot. Nobody. They have reasons. And it's your job to find those reasons. And not only to find those reasons, but also to find why they have those reasons. What human values that you can connect with as a human being are motivating them, right? So if someone's against abortion, they say it because it's murder, obviously they care about human life, right? That's the principle they're hinging all of this upon. I care about human life too. Even though I don't agree with you about this, I definitely care about the human life part. That is fundamental common ground that you can put your disagreement on instead of a fault line, instead of this horrible place where we're starting from we're enemies, right? We're trying to solve a problem here. Then, only then, you collaborate, right? So you say, okay, look, you're not in favor of abortion, right? Because you believe that human life is precious and you want to protect the unborn who you see as innocent victims in this process, right? I can see that. My issue is unwanted pregnancies can be also horrible for the lives of women, right? So what if we try to figure out some process, maybe sex ed earlier on, maybe access to contraception, so that we can just minimize the number of people who find themselves in a situation where they have to make that decision in the first place. What if we did something like that? What if we worked out some policy? What if we came up with funding for this sort of thing? Now, do you see what I just did? Did you notice what I just did? I said, we. Even though I don't agree, even though I'm not on that side of the issue, I'm on the side of let's make life better for people, right? Let's help people who are suffering. Let's prevent suffering. And I've changed it from a combative conversation to a collaborative one. How can we fix this problem? Here's the fundamental value that we share. How can we use that fundamental value that we share to come up with a solution that maybe gets us at least halfway towards what we're talking about, or something that's better than what we have now? That's the key. That's where we're at. So, I wanted to leave a lot of time for Q&A because I can imagine you're all just like, what about, what about, what about? That's my favorite part, so we'll do that. But I'll leave you with this quote. And this is what I think should motivate you. This is something that I think you should have in the back of your head at all times. This quote from Abraham Lincoln: "I do not like that man. I must get to know him better." Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much. We'll now hear from our formal respondents before turning to you, the audience, for your questions. Our first respondent is my fellow CRC honors student, Jaden Tyler.
Thank you for your talk. That was very enlightening. I have a query. Mm-hmm. To what extent are you allowed to starman? At what point are you arguing for them? At what point is their argument so poorly constructed that you're creating an argument for them to use against you?
Okay. I've gotten this a lot, actually. Most of it's steel manning, though. Like, why would I make their argument better? Why would I help their argument? And there are two reasons for that. The first is you want to be as honest as possible, right? So you want to, part of the exchange is to assure them that you're not here to fight. You're not just here to defeat them as if they're some kind of dragon. You're there to actually have some kind of exchange towards understanding, right? The second thing is you may be wrong. You may be misunderstanding what their perspective is. So even if your idea is, this is a stupid argument and I'm not going to help it, well, maybe it's a stupid argument, but maybe what you're hearing is a stupid argument and it's not actually what they feel or think. So doing your best to articulate it in the best possible way is just saving you that effort and that confusion. But most importantly, though, I think, in my opinion, is I don't like leaving dishes in the sink. You know, they're going to get crusty, they're going to get fucking annoying, and I don't want to do all that scrubbing tomorrow. So I'm just going to do the dishes right now. So if I can think of a better argument than the one that's presented to me, I should just skip the bad argument and go straight to the better one and deal with that. Because if I don't, first of all, people will think, he avoided the good one. That must mean he doesn't have a rebuttal. That must mean I'm right about that. And I don't want people walking away thinking I'm not right. So I'm going to do that, right? But also, I lost my train of thought with that joke. But, but also, it's going to come back to bite you anyway, right? Someone's going to think of that better argument. So you might as well nip it in the bud. Do those dishes now. That's the way I look at it.
Thank you so much. Our next respondent is my fellow CRC Honors Program student, Alejandra Rangel Lozano.
Thank you for your great discussion about how we need to approach compassion to argue to each other. And I want to ask you, until which point do you think we can, like if the other person is taking a straw man approach, until which point could we transform that conversation from that argument to a steel man argument?
So you can't force people to do things they don't want to do. So if you're engaging with somebody who is not reciprocating what you're trying to do, right? If you're coming in with good faith, you're coming in with compassion, you're trying to understand them, they're not doing the same thing, they're just hitting you with the same venom over and over again, it's not a conversation. So the conversation's over. And you can say so. What I would suggest you don't do is reciprocate what they're giving you, which is the same venom and bile that we already have too much of. Right? So I always say, first of all, not every conversation needs to be had right now. Not every conversation needs to be had by you. Sometimes you're the wrong person. Sometimes it's not something you can handle, emotionally, whatever. And so that's a good thing for you to recognize and see yourself out. And it's always better to disengage or to not engage at all than to engage poorly and to contribute to more of that poor engagement. So if you see it's not working, leave the door open. Say, look, we're not getting anywhere. Maybe we'll try again some other time. I'm sorry if there's something I misunderstood, but I don't feel like you're getting me. So, have a nice day. I've done that a ton. It's completely fair, and it's good for you to do. And it's way better for you to do than to start baring your teeth and digging your heels in and making it worse. Right? Don't become the thing that they think you are. Being the exception to the rule is incredibly powerful. When someone expects you to be this vicious, horrible person who doesn't listen to them, who thinks they're a monster, who just wants to destroy them and make fun of them or whatever it is, do the opposite. Show them the compassion that you don't think they're giving you. And say, hey, look, I'm trying. But if you don't want to, that's cool. Right? The last thing that they can take from you is your own sense of dignity, the way that you carry yourself, and they can only take it from you if you give it to them. Never give it to them. Ever. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you. Professor Jason Cohen, would you like to add anything?
For sure.
I'm curious, if I recall Bloom correctly, and it's been a long time since I've looked at the book, the difference between empathy and compassion is really sort of the difference in common parlance between feelings and reason. You use reason to experience compassion, you don't use reason to experience empathy.
Yeah.
So, given that we live in a society that doesn't really like to use reason a whole lot, right? How do we get people to switch from empathy to compassion? The only thing I can think of is, well, have more discourse.
Well, sure, that's part of it. But also, I think the best example of all this stuff is yourself, you know? Because what do we think? Well, we live in a society that doesn't really reason very well. And that's a shame, because if everyone reasoned the way I do, everything would be better. Everyone is thinking that about everybody else. Kind of like how 60% of drivers think that they're above average drivers. That just mathematically makes no sense, right? So I think there's that, right? And then you can just flip that on people. Because people have reasons, or at least they think they do. And so they are at least convinced that they are reasoning, even when they're not. So what I would say is appeal to that assumption they're making and do it for yourself as well, because this can always be you that's the problem. And just kind of hijack that. And it actually ends up short-circuiting and forcing people to reason in the way that they thought they were, right? Because they've already committed to it. Yeah.
If I could just come back one little thing, I think people do always have reasons. We agree about that. I'm
They're
not actually
post-hoc.
sure people always think they have reasons. I think
Yeah.
I've had conversations with people and say, I don't know why I believe what I believe, but this is what I believe, and so this is right.
Oh, that's an incredibly enlightened person you're talking to, because most of the time they have a feeling and then their brain goes, okay, pull me up some reasons for the feeling. And that's what they give you. And they kind of then retroactively act as though the reasons came first, right? But again, if you know that, if you recognize that about people and yourself, this always applies backwards as well, then you can kind of hijack that. Or hijack is the wrong word. You can harness it and put people to task for the thing that they're committing to tacitly. Just say like, you know, we're reasonable people. Both of us are trying our best to figure out what's right here, right? We're trying to be reasonable. You lay that on the table, you actually kind of prime people to behave more rationally than they normally would. And also, if you don't appear threatening to them, if you don't come at them as if you are their enemy, they're also more likely to calm down and start thinking a little more clearly.
Fantastic, thank you. We'll now turn to the audience for questions. Dr. Swan will be moderating this section.
Right, so again, Professors Silvestro and Schubert do their best Bill Donahue impersonation. Just raise your hand, they will find you.
Hi. So you mentioned putting aside the psychopath population in order to effectively speak about majority of the population having good intentions basically in mind. So I think that there are people in political power who are very extreme who don't have these good intentions in mind. And I'm wondering if you think that those people would be classified as a third thing, or psychopaths, or if you don't agree that they are psychopaths, I guess. I'm sorry, that they don't have good intentions.
Well, so I'll just clarify again, though. Good intentions, right? People hear that, and sometimes they go, no way. Hitler didn't have good intentions. According to your version of good intentions, that's correct. And certainly mine. But in his own head, he's thinking, I'm going to make Germany great. I'm going to make the world better because of XYZ crazy thing that I believe, right? That's important. It's important to recognize that. So I would say a significant number of political actors are in this category of they are convinced that they are correct in their views, in their worldview, and they are convinced that what they're doing is at least justifiable because what they're trying to achieve is a good thing. And that is true even if they're wrong about those conclusions. So that's important to recognize. Now, does politics select for a higher percentage in general of psychopathic people, probably. I don't know. I don't have numbers on that stuff. I wouldn't want to just presume, but they're not my favorite people. They don't strike me as that. But also, we've also seen in our own lives and also in public life, people who seem to be very well adjusted, very well intentioned, by our own definition of what that means, go into a system, attempt to work within it, and become deranged by it, and maybe make decisions that we don't understand, and then later make decisions that we find reprehensible, right? We've seen that progression. We've seen people do that online, right? A friend of ours starts spending a ton of time in certain corners of the internet. Suddenly they start believing and saying and doing crazy things that we don't think are good or sane and not even recognizable, right? So there is an environmental factor to this as well. There are incentives, right? Sometimes a certain amount of money is enough to get people to do things they know are wrong. Sometimes a certain amount of power, sometimes a certain amount of influence within a certain group, right? We're complicated in that way, we're difficult in that way, we're not consistent in that way, so yeah, that's part of it. But also, I would say the vast majority are still acting in accordance with what they believe is good and right and just, even if they're wrong about that. And that's a really important thing to understand if we want to be effective in our opposition and in our ability to persuade those who are persuadable.
The next question comes from over here.
Kind of a complex question, but
Cool.
I guess I'm kind of thinking, if you're in areas where, it's going to come back to civics a lot and public policy, where sometimes if you're thinking of like game theory or rational choice theory, the most rational choice is not to starman, because you have a group of people that don't understand the difference between forming arguments and what steel manning versus straw manning is. They take whatever your interpretation of the argument is to be true or to be the argument that needs to be argued or defended. The incentive is to then straw man and not star man.
Right.
And you mentioned that we can't get people to do what we want to do. How do we, I guess, de-incentivize rational choice and game theory to maneuver around your opponent's best arguments and appeal to the general public in ways that don't star or steel man arguments, if that makes sense?
It's a very human compulsion. Short-term gains are kind of, like we really want to lose weight, right? We really want to be 20 pounds lighter. And we want for, this coming summer, we get into our bathing suits and we look amazing. But that donut right now, man, it looks good. And it takes everything I have in me to not eat 12 of them, right? We have that problem. We can create systems and structures that try to incentivize better behavior. But ultimately, systems and structures are only as good as the people who are running them, designing them. And so if your calculus is, I will achieve my short-term goals by being dishonest, by circumventing their argument, making them look stupid, dunking on them online, right? Strawmanning them because it's easier to defeat them. And I don't mind doing that because I'm convinced that I'm right and they're wrong, so it's not much of a loss. Well, anything you justify doing against others, you're also justifying them doing against you. And you create this world where that's the norm. That's where we're at. I think we've seen where that gets us, so why don't we try the other thing? It's hard. It takes constant effort, just like working out and losing weight, right? But we know it's good for us. We know it's better. It's just a matter of putting ourselves in circumstances and situations where we are more likely to do the right thing than the wrong thing. And that starts, in my opinion, with everyone in this room leaving this room, committing themselves to doing better and being better, so that there are at least 200 more people doing that than there were this morning.
Hi, I wanted to just say I really appreciate the way that you're kind of spelling all this out for us in a way that seems very applicable to having conversations and discourse with our peers. And I'm wondering if you could maybe explore if you've already identified limitations to the effectiveness of this kind of strategy as it pertains to engaging in discourse where power dynamics exist in practical applications. And I'd like to give the example, if I may, of using this sort of strategy, say in an argument with a professor or a boss or somebody that you depend on in some way who holds views that are maybe dehumanizing or contraindicative of their ability to reciprocate this level of compassion.
Yeah, well, first of all, you don't give compassion because you expect getting it back. You give compassion because it's the right thing to do. That's, I think, something that we need to just decide for ourselves, right? Like it's something that I'm just going to do no matter what, because that's what I think is the right thing to do. And someone else's behavior is not going to change that about myself and who I am. I'm going to be who I am and do what I believe, even if I'm not getting it back, because that's not why I'm doing it. So there's that. With respect to power dynamics and things like that, I mean, Dr. Bradley talked about something similar, which is that we have laws, we have rules, we have systems and structures, right? So there are protocols, right? If you're talking about your boss, hopefully there's an HR person that you can refer to as a third party, right? If you're talking about a professor, there's a similar department or a group of people that you can appeal to if there's really an issue, right? But if it's just a matter of someone in a position of authority over you or power over you or influence over you that holds views that you don't feel are conducive to your own flourishing, you have options. It's not necessary for you to be the person, like I said, to engage with them and try to fix that, if that's something that you feel very strongly about. It might be better for you to just take yourself out of that circumstance if it's possible, right? But also, remember what we've been talking about. And also, people who hold these views hold them for reasons. And those reasons are not because I'm stupid or evil, right? So maybe there's an opportunity for you to dig deeper and learn something. Now, we're getting close to the holidays. This is something that also people ask me about, so I'll preempt it. Thanksgiving dinner with my family, my crazy uncle is gonna show up saying all this insane stuff, right? What do I do? Well, first of all, you don't have to talk about that stuff, right? It's Thanksgiving. You can talk about how much you love each other and all that good stuff, right? You don't have to get into this. But if it turns into one of those conversations like I've seen on the internet where like the table gets flipped over and all this crazy stuff, I don't know how people do that, but there's an opportunity for you to say, you know what? I'm gonna switch on understanding mode. I'm not here to change minds and I'm not here to fight. I literally just want to understand how this person's brain works. Let me see if by the end of this encounter with this person, I can anticipate what they're gonna say about a given thing on this topic because I so fully understand how their brain works and where they're coming from and how they're seeing it. If you can do that, that is a very powerful tool, not just for engaging with them better, but also for yourself, for steeling yourself in your encounters with that person. Like, okay, I know how this person is. I know why. I completely understand their story. I know how they got here. And if it were me, and I had their story, I would be them. That's crazy to think about. So there are ways for you to take a step back and use it as an opportunity. Right now, that may not be appealing depending on what the situation is, and I'm not saying it's always the case that you would do this, but it's something to think about. Right? You're not better off. Something the president of FIRE says all the time. You're not better off knowing less about what people think. The information, at the very least, is good for you to have because it changes the way that you interact with the world. It's good to know. If your neighbor thinks that there's like a cabal of lizard people who live in the center of the earth that control everything, that's like really important information to have about your next door neighbor, right? Or if someone you're dating thinks that, that's a good thing to know about them. So I always try my best to find ways to deal with the circumstance. Like if I'm going to be on hold for a very long time, I'm going to be on a really long flight and I'm exhausted. This is a test. This is a meditative test. How long can I put up with this? Can I put up with the whole thing? I'm determined to put up with the whole thing. You know what? I'm going to put up with the whole thing. And when I get off the plane, I go, damn, I put up with the whole thing. What else can I do? That's kind of how I try to do it, because that's one way to get through these difficult circumstances. You could do the same thing with difficult conversations, especially if there's power dynamics at play and things like that. But it's very difficult. It's hard to speak generally about these things because, everyone is different, every situation is different. So hopefully that's helpful, though.
Thank you very much for the talk and for enduring the long flight out here. So I appreciate the new concept. I feel like it's very horizon broadening, and I like it, but I'm also concerned about it because I fear it may be an invitation to something traditionally considered to be a fallacy, and that's the ad hominem fallacy. The idea of trying to understand a person's story and where they're coming from might license, either consciously or unconsciously, a way of dismissing another person's ideas. So, again, the standard lesson is arguments stand or fall on their own merits regardless of the motivations or the stories, the biographies behind the people who make them.
Right.
And that's, in standard critical thinking, that's how you're supposed to evaluate
That's
it.
right, yeah.
Once you start bringing in the story, again, while it may have all these incredible pro-social benefits that you're talking about, it also might make me say things like, well, yeah, okay, now that I understand your story, I understand why you think that way. If I had that same story, I would think that same way too. And that explains why you're wrong, because you had that misleading story and that totally distorted your point of view. Or if you had my upbringing, you would see clearly what the truth is. And while it's rarely going to be that egregious, I fear something like that might happen. So I'm curious if you can speak to that concern.
Yeah. Well, the goal here is that understanding the person's story rehumanizes that person, which then hopefully allows you to see their argument clearly. That's the goal. Now, I guess there's a risk of what you're saying, but only if, in my opinion, only if you're not turning that same eye inward, right? If you're not recognizing I'm also the product of my own story, and of course I think what I think because what happened to me happened to me. So now we're both here. So now what do we do? Well, now it's about the arguments and their merits and how we together can figure this out, right? I'm not automatically better than anybody just because I can figure out what their story is and see, okay, yeah, I totally understand why you got to this ridiculous, stupid conclusion and why you're being dumb about it. No, you're not being dumb. You're being exactly as I would expect you to be based on everything that led up to you being here in this moment, arguing what you're arguing. And that's me too. And I could be the one who's messing up here. Maybe there's something I'm not seeing. So that compassion actually turns in the other direction as well and goes, well, what am I missing? What don't I see? What are the things that that person can tell about my story that I can't tell about my own, right? So it has to be a two-way street constantly. I can also be the one who's wrong here. As strongly as I feel, I can also be the one who's wrong. And all of you know what this feels like because you've all been wrong before, right? You guys remember? And before you found out you were wrong, how did you feel about the thing you were wrong about? You thought you were right. It felt like, yeah, no, this is just obvious and right, until you found out it was wrong. And then you learned the thing, and then you made the unconscious assumption that you always knew what you knew, right? So, yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you all for your time today. I don't know how many other people have been here all day. I've been here all day. I'm a staff member here. I'm also an incoming grad student. So I'm actually on a professional development day, so I want to thank you guys for being here. And I think your talk perfectly book-ended, I feel like, the first part of the session, Dr. Bradley.
You totally planned it.
Yeah, well, it was beautiful if you did. I feels very much on that same spectrum of like humanizing people and giving them the benefit of the doubt simply because they're people. And I think like on that same line, something that I've had like in the back of my head all day is like, and it was obviously discussed as the day has gone on, but like, you know, in terms of radical rhetoric specifically, and things that are just being said in the media and by politicians, by people in power, by the president, whoever. The rhetoric is it's radical, and it is oftentimes feels dehumanizing, I think, on both ends of the spectrum in terms of whether you're talking about suppressing certain groups of people or if you're on the progressive side, the dehumanizing of people that are on the right. And I think similarly to what somebody had asked before to Dr. Cohen, like At what point are we like so far gone, I guess? Like, I think it's more like the conversations being had right now are so boots on the ground, right? Like, what can I do right now with the person sitting right next to me and in my community on campus? And with everything going on in the larger scale, like, how do we bring the larger scale back down to like level 1 when it feels like we are on like level 5, the red button's been pushed, everything just feels so chaotic?
Okay, good questions. I want to say a few things, and I want to try not to lose my train of thought. First thing, being a politics and news junkie does not make you more interesting, informed, or engaged. It just makes you insane. So get off the diet of constant media barrage, right? Like, the news is never going to tell you how many planes don't crash. They're not going to tell you how many robberies don't happen. They're not going to tell you how many times the police stop crimes before they happen. You're not going to hear about that stuff because that's not the stuff that makes you click, right? Keep that in mind. Now, there's also the more in common surveys that have been brought up before, right? 85% of people actually agree on most things. It's generally what the conclusion is, right? The extremes are what get all the attention. They're the ones that make all the noise, and they're overrepresented in our perception of what the other side is, right? We judge our own side based on the normal people who think the normal things, and we judge the other side based on the most insane, radical, crazy examples that we can think of. So keep that in mind, right? Your perception is very important. Now, social media. We've heard about, Twitter is insane. We can't have these conversations online. I respectfully disagree. I am here today. People who know my name because of Twitter, because of how I chose to engage in Twitter, how I chose to engage with people on Twitter. I decided I'm going to make an example of the better way to do it, and I'm going to do it in this thunderdome of discourse where everyone thinks, no, this is a cesspool, it's impossible, there's no way to do it. I did it, and I did it enough, successfully enough, that it got certain people's attention, and I got hired to do things like this. But here I am as an example, and I'm not special, I'm not a superhuman, I'm just doing the things that I just explained. I'm just living by those virtues and values as best as I can, apologizing when I screw up, and just making a conscious effort to do it differently. So it's only half true that our internet algorithms are incentivized to give us stuff that pisses us off, that makes us angry, that makes us polarized, right? That's only half true. Those algorithms are only interested in getting and keeping your attention. It is up to us what gets and keeps our attention. So when you get fed rage bait, don't take the rage bait, and you will suddenly start getting fed something else. Because all they want is your attention and engagement. If you give them attention and engagement for other stuff, you will train them to bring that other stuff back to you. Search cat videos for a couple of hours on YouTube and see what happens to your algorithm. You just get cat videos because they're like, oh, this person likes cats. Just give you cats. So what about civil discourse, compassionate engagement, reasonable disagreement? What if you do that? What if you input that into the algorithm? What if everyone in this room does that? 200 plus people. What will happen to the algorithm? What will happen to our conversations? What will happen to us? Think about that. The power is in our hands. We are under this illusion that we are slave to these other powers. We have way more control than we think, at the very least about ourselves, what we can do, how we choose to behave and be in the world. So be better, do better. That's what I'm trying to do. So I encourage you all to try it.
My question is in regards to people that maybe stand out and face disagreement amongst their peers, whether on campus or in public, often. For example, if I wore a big purple hat to school every day, people would probably ask me why I'm wearing it a lot, and I would be frustrated with the need to justify what I'm wearing or how I express myself every day. So even with all the guidelines that you've given us, do you have any further guidance for just the act of expressing disagreement with someone may in itself be disrespectful to them, and especially for someone who has to face that on a daily basis? Is there a time when it's better to recognize not to bring up a disagreement, especially if you think that person maybe faces it often? Or is the burden on that person who has chosen to stand out or just stands out? They need to accept that they're going to be disagreed with often and just have to face it?
It's probably both. If you are someone who has opinions and you know that you're in the minority, that's just something that's going to happen. That's not a bad thing, though. It's good to be the interesting person. It's good to be the different person. I know that it doesn't feel that way. I know that all we want is to hide in the crowd and just be a part of the crowd and fit in and not make noise. But that's not interesting. Who wants to do that? And look, I'll point out my bias here. I was never good at fitting in. I tried very, very hard, and I feel like if I had been successful at trying to, dress the way certain people dressed or listen to the music that other people listened to, that I was supposed to listen to, maybe if I was successful at that kind of chameleon game, then maybe I wouldn't be here because I would have just hidden the rest of my life. But I'm glad that I sucked at that because it forced me to become myself and to just be okay with being myself. And sometimes that means dealing with the fact that you're by yourself. You're the only person who thinks this way. You're the only person who's really into these things. But again, this was in the late 1900s. You guys are in a completely different universe. You have the whole world in your pocket. And you can find people who think and feel the way you do about basically anything. So you don't have to feel alone. You don't have to deal with that. So if the people directly around you don't understand you and are constantly poking and prodding, and you feel left out by them, there is a community somewhere, right? And the thing is, the most universal feeling in the world is alienation and loneliness. Everybody feels like they don't fit in. So maybe everyone's walking around feeling that way and thinking that way, and it's actually not true, right? Imposter syndrome has a name because of how many people feel it, that it needed to be labeled and then studied. So think about that. How many imposters can there possibly be? Right? So the odds are you feel the thing because it's a common thing to feel, but it's not true. So maybe cut yourself some slack, cut other people slack because maybe they're asking you questions, because as long as someone's asking you questions, no one's asking them questions, right? So yeah, I mean, it's a mess. Growing up sucks. It's hard. I get it. I wouldn't trade places with you for anything in the world. I did it once, that's enough. But you'll be okay. Just hang on to who you are. Hang on to who you are at your core. I'm not talking about your beliefs or your ideas, right? Your ideas are like clothes. You wear them, sometimes they look good on you, sometimes you feel like, when people think of me, they think of me wearing this thing. That's how connected to me this article of clothing is. But in 5 years, 10 years, you might look back and be like, I can't believe I wore that. It's so embarrassing, right? But that doesn't mean it wasn't you. You were still you back then, and you're still you right now. Hang on to that. That's what I mean. Hopefully that's helpful.
Hey, I was walking in the hallway and I heard you talking. Really, really interesting. So I'm a STEM major, not a philosophy major, but I find
My condolences.
Your way of articulating is really, really good.
Thank you.
So I wrote this down. So some painful issues have multiple perspectives that make sense to the people holding them. I have now really been able to talk about the Ukraine war with some of my friends on either the Ukraine or Russia side, because everyone has like deeply held beliefs and personal experiences, and some lost family, friends, etc. on both sides. And there's a lot of painful emotions that people have on different sides of the issue.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, how important do you believe it is to talk about issues that don't really have a clear-cut one right answer? Kind of like you have in math, 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah.
Even if talking about those issues constrain your relationships. And what's the risk of not talking about those hot button issues and just talking about something that's has less of a emotional threshold and a less of a risk of alienating each other?
Well, I think probably the most important aspect of discussing issues that are not clear-cut and that are really morally gray and are complicated is not so that you find the solution, it's so that you can understand that those issues exist and that that's the case for most issues, right? That there is no clear-cut answer. There is no perfect yes or no. There is no mathematical thing that you can put at the end of the equal sign and it fixes everything. Sometimes it's a mess, and sometimes we're just doing the best we can. I think that recognition is the most important part of having those conversations. And that's why it's so important to have people that you can have those conversations with and to develop the relationships so that you can have those conversations without sacrificing everything, without, oh, we're not friends anymore because we don't see eye to eye on this thing. It's, hey, we are friends and we both can see how complicated this is. Because I know as your friend that you're coming from a good place. You know I'm coming from a good place. We don't land on the same spot when it comes to this thing, but we can see why. It's because it's complicated and difficult. And you have these priorities, and I have these priorities, and neither of those priorities are wrong. Right? I think that kind of meta-realization, that the situation is difficult, war is difficult, that stuff is hard, right? Like you can just say, yeah, killing people is wrong. Sure. But it's much more complicated, right? You're talking about countries and all this crazy stuff and history, like all these things, right? That are not in your control and that are extremely complicated from basically every perspective, right? So I think probably the biggest lesson is that most things are not clear-cut. And we have to just continue to engage. We have to just continue to try and maybe make like an inch of progress. And that's huge. An inch of progress is huge. So build those relationships, right? Like, you know, I disagree with my siblings all the time. We have like hardcore, you know, like leaning over the table disagreements when we're having dinner and stuff like that. But there's never a moment during any of those disagreements where I wouldn't stop, give them a hug and say, I love you. And I cherish that because that is why we are able to have those big disagreements. Because there's no fear. There's no sense in me that I might go too far, that they won't talk to me after this, you know, that I'll ruin my relationship with my brother. There's no fear of that because we love each other as brothers. We can create that with friends. We can create that with strangers even in 5 minutes. We can do that. It takes work. It can be done. I think that's the most important part.
Can I add just one quick thing to that?
Yeah.
Which is, if you're not willing to do that, then you're not really showing the person that you're talking to who you are. You're keeping it at a superficial level.
Right, yeah.
You can't possibly expect them to get to know you. Can't expect them to possibly show you who they are.
Right.
Which means you're not really connecting.
Yeah. And it's just, that keeps spiraling until nobody is ever thinking or saying what they feel, and nobody ever knows what anybody else thinks or feels, and we get this, you know, so.
Thank you for this really beautiful discussion. My question has to do with, I really love your perspective on compassion and dialogue, but what about those instances where your compassion itself kind of stunts you from being able to take any kind of action? Like when you truly, fully understand the other side's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, for example, like between you and your parent. Your parent has this worldview, and they live within that worldview, and so any other kind of perspective to them is like dangerous or a threat.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of impossible to have a productive conversation when they're unwilling to incorporate like outside perspectives into the dialogue. And you completely, fully understand all of their worries and completely, you know, so like, and if your perspective in that dialogue to them is dangerous, it's like, how do you make the decision to choose what is right for yourself when like that compassion kind of gets in the way or makes it hard to?
Well, you can't be your parents, right? So you can understand them, you can have compassion for where they're coming from, you can love them and you can know that they love you, and they can still be wrong about what you need to do with yourself or for yourself. And the thing is, only you can really decide that, and only you will live with the consequences of whatever that decision is, right? As much as they love you and as much as they try to influence you and tell you, where they think you should be going or what you should be doing, you're the one who has to wake up every morning and be you and do what you do. So ultimately it comes to you. And, someone asked me to work a Superman reference into this, and here it is. There's a moment in the most recent movie where Clark is having a conversation with his father, and he says, my parents, they're not who I thought I was. I'm not who I thought I was. They sent me here for a different reason. And his adoptive father says, parents are not for telling their children who they're supposed to be. Our job is to give you guys the tools to make fools of yourselves all on your own. So that's kind of where I'm seeing that. And the compassion doesn't have to dissipate or change. It can actually get bigger, because you can say, look, thank you for everything you've done for me. I love you and I will always love you, but I can see that this is a decision I need to make on my own for myself. And that for all the reasons that I understand, you're not exactly helpful right now. And that's okay.
So I heard a message on the difference between sympathy and compassion recently, and they said sometimes when you're sympathetic with someone, you say, oh, I know how you feel. And which can actually hinder dialogue, because the other person automatically is going, you have no idea how I feel.
Yeah.
So they were saying the importance of having compassion versus empathy. So are there certain phrases that we might just innocently say that signals empathy and could be reworded better for compassion?
I get into this. This happens to me a lot, where I say, oh yeah, I understand, or I know how you feel. I really think I do. And they go, no, you couldn't possibly. And I go, well, I mean, obviously I'm not you, and I'm not living your life, but the thing that's affecting you right now is something that has affected me in another way. So I feel like there's a bridge there. And I mean, I'm an artist. I music, I love movies. We cry during movies. We laugh during movies. Why? It's not even really happening. But we're watching a simulation of something that is human, and we're connecting with that. And so when someone is crying over their dead mom, my mom's alive, but I know how that person feels. There's a devastating loss. That's what I'm connecting to. And I know what a devastating loss feels like. Not that exact one, but I know enough to be able to relate, to connect. So I think, I don't know, a lot of times people almost want to be alone in that feeling and say, you couldn't possibly understand what I'm going through. But I just think, then you can just take a step back and be like, all right, well, why do they feel so strongly about that? And maybe I can connect to that. People play language games and things like that. But there's another great Baldwin quote, actually. You think your pain and suffering is unique in the history of all mankind, something to that effect. But then you read. You realize that, man, this happens to everyone. It's the most human thing of all. Right? I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically the sentiment. I think art is a really powerful vehicle for that. And if someone is insistent, no one feels what I'm feeling, no one could possibly understand, you can understand that. I understand that feeling of feeling like no one understands. So you could just keep going like that and be really annoying.
Thank you for the discussion and giving us so much space to ask so many questions.
Thank you.
Would you say that, or I'm just curious about your opinion on if all human desires and sensibilities that we can identify with necessarily bring us closer to compassion? Like, let's say my opponent, I can see his motivations are towards his own success, satisfaction, and security, right? But I still ultimately think, oh, it's not justifiable because,
Right.
why are you always necessarily justified in seeking your own security, success, and satisfaction over all else?
It's definitely true. But the thing that you can do, though, is because you can point to it as a value that's motivating them, you can kind of show them why their approach, assuming you're correct, right? You can at least show them why you think their approach is not actually going to give them what they want, right? So if someone is like, for example, everyone's on a deserted island, right? Plane crashes on a deserted island, everybody's stuck there like lost. There's one character who is scavenging for all the vital, important stuff and stashing it away and keeping it so that they have everything they need, right? So they're pursuing their own safety and their own security, right? I have everything I need to survive. I have all the food, I have all the water, I will want for nothing. So I'm gonna make sure I'm taking care of myself, right? I would see that and say, well, yeah, you're doing that, but you're also creating a situation where all the other people around you don't have enough, and they know that you have a lot. So now you've created a problem for yourself where you are constantly having to guard all your stuff because people are going to come and try to take it. So you've created more problems than you've solved, really, because it would be better if everyone stashed the stuff and came up with some system for rationing it out so that you all survive. That way nobody's stealing from anybody, right? So you're still appealing to that same motivation, but you're broadening their horizons on it so that they can see that they're actually undercutting their own aim with their behavior, right? If you really care about feeling safe, it's probably a good idea for everyone around you to feel safe too, because then you actually are. Something like that, for example.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for your personal anecdotes and your insight on argumentation.
Yep.
This is a different related topic, but I was wondering, in regards to people, I have some friends and family who also argue with politics with me, but also some who don't. My question is, when you interact with people who don't necessarily follow politics or don't necessarily care about the news, or very apathetic, I guess, what is your perspective on how you approach those that maybe should be more aware of the important news cycles, the important events that are happening in the world, but just don't really care or have any thoughts?
There's definitely a level of uninformed that is not good, but there's also a level of informed that is good, that is bad, I should say. Like I said a little bit earlier, obsessively following the news cycle is just not good for you. And I mean, who remembers like all the stuff they were freaking out about 2 weeks ago? Most of it is probably gone because it really wasn't actually that important. It was just the thing you're supposed to be paying attention to right now. So assuming you're not talking about just that, you're talking about actually really important stuff, you explain to people why it's important the same way you would explain anything. Here are the reasons why this affects you, and you should probably pay attention to it. And if that doesn't work, I mean, you can't force them, right? But the best you can do is try. So I guess I would try. But again, the caveat being, in my opinion, we all consume way too much media and way too much news under this mistaken assumption that we need to stay informed. And by that, we mean we need to be constantly refreshing the feed so that we know everything that's happening all the time so that we can, freak out about it, do nothing? For the vast majority of things, it's things that are outside of our control and that we won't have the bandwidth to pay attention to in a week. So save your energy for things that are actually really, really important and actually affect you and the people around you in ways that you can do something about. It's also good for your mental health because despairing over all the stuff you can't control also doesn't do anything. It's the exact same outcome whether you despair about it or not because you can't control it. So you're better off not despairing because then maybe the other things that you can control are getting more of your attention and a better version of you because you're not freaking out and despairing. So Anybody else? I'll go all day, just so you know.
I appreciate everything you said so far and how you went into depth about how it actually applies to us in like every day.
Yeah.
And a question I had is going all the way back to the court example. Is you had this witness who gave a very compelling story, and because of that, they drew on the empathy and emotions of the jurors. As a result, they won the case.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you saw this exploitation of empathy, or would it be irrational compassion, as what ways you would implement to fix this, or if you would just consider this like playing the game, or it's just the system?
Well, that's the reason why I advocate for rational compassion, because it allows you to detach enough that you don't necessarily get hijacked by that, right? Like I can feel very deeply for the person on the witness stand telling their story. It's really horrible what happened to you. I feel for you in that way. But I have to also recognize that that doesn't necessarily convince me that this person is guilty, right? We need evidence. There's a reason we have systems. Another example is like the emergency room, right? We go in the emergency room. If you've ever been in the emergency room, you know what it's like. You might be there for quite a long time, right? Now imagine someone comes in there with their kid, and their kid is the one who's hurt, right? That parental instinct is the kind that if someone kind of snuck up next to them and said, hey, if you slip me $50, I'll put you in the front of the line, the kid will get seen in about 2 minutes. Or you can wait 4 hours. The instinct is, yes, take care of my kid right now. I'll give you whatever you want, right? We understand that instinct. And I feel for any parent who's in that circumstance, right? But we also know that the ER can't work like that. We can't let it work like that, right? Because then it just becomes a place where anybody with the money gets seen, and the people who don't, maybe don't, ever, right? And we can't have that. That's just a system that is not going to work. That's the difference, right? I can feel for the kid, and I can feel for the parent, and I can say, I completely understand where you're coming from and why you want to do what you want to do. But I also can't let you do it because the implications of that create something that we don't want. So we have to be able to separate that out. And it's difficult, especially when it's a topic that we feel really strongly about emotionally. But that's another reason why I advise everyone to make a list of the topics where you know you reliably can't engage in good faith. You can't engage effectively, rationally, like you lose it. There's a point where you get pissed off and it's over, right? If you know that about yourself, it helps. And you can also voice this to your interlocutor. If you get into that topic, you can say, look, the last time I talked about this, I got really upset, so please forgive me. If I start to get agitated, let me know, and we'll pause it, right? So you can bring them in and help you out. Now you become, again, collaborators in this. You're trying your best, but you know your limitations. And you can have other people help pick up the slack for you. So that's another thing you can do. It's all about being conscious and mindful of yourself, your emotions, what you can and cannot do in the moment, and what your goal actually is. I'll just say one last thing. As you go out there, if you attempt to do this stuff, visit starmanning.com, by the way. There's a printout, a one sheet that's kind of like a cheat sheet of the 3 steps that you can have with you. But remember one thing. The goal is not necessarily to persuade the other person. Certainly not in a single conversation. Just think about the things that you feel really strongly about, and think about what it would take for someone to sit down and convince you out of that. You think it would happen in a single conversation? No. You think it would happen in 5, 10, maybe, right? But think about how strongly you feel about it. Everyone feels that way. So don't expect when you sit down to engage with somebody that you're going to change their mind. You have this amazing argument. You're going to hear what they got to say. You're going to tell them why they're wrong. And the world will be better because you will have converted somebody. That's not how it works. But if you leave a conversation with both of you open to having another one, that's a victory. So have that be your goal. More engagement. Like, I'm glad we had this conversation. Let's do it again. Yeah, sure. Victory. That's good. Do that, and who knows what might happen. I'll leave you with that.
We have reached the end of our program. We will first thank the presenters in this last section. We'd also like to thank you for being here, especially those of you who have been here all day. A hand of applause for you. And of course, we'd like to acknowledge the support that we've received in producing this event. The Wagonless Foundation with support from Bank of America, the Cosumnes River College Office of the President, the Sac State Office of the President, the Heterodox Academy, the Sacramento Educational Cable Consortium. Thank you all. This is an important conversation. Don't let it end. It will continue. I'd like to draw your attention to a couple of events coming up, sponsored by the Sac State Council on Academic Freedom on October 23rd at 4:30 p.m. in Mendocino 1003. There will be a presentation on freedom of speech and the government on November 20th, same time, 4:30 p.m., same venue, Mendocino 1003. There will be a presentation on free speech and social media. You're, of course, welcome to attend. You can keep an eye out for announcements website of the Center for Professional and Practical. Thank you once again for being here.